January 11th, 9:47 in the evening. A man in a ski mask is standing on Nancy Guthrie's front porch in Tucson, Arizona. He has a gun holster on. He is wearing it over his jacket. He positions a flower pot directly in front of the doorbell camera and waits. At that exact same moment, someone in Tucson is conducting a Google search. Not for Savannah Guthrie, not for the NBC Today show. They search the specific street address of Nancy's house. The house where the man in the ski mask is standing right now. Two forms of surveillance, digital and physical, happening simultaneously, on the same night, from the same city. 3 weeks later, Nancy Guthrie is gone. Now here is the question that nobody has answered publicly. When a man named Derek Kayla sent a ransom text demanding Bitcoin, he did not send it to Savannah Guthrie. Savannah is the NBC anchor, the public face, the person whose name and career supposedly motivated this entire crime. He sent it to Tommaso Cioni, the son-in-law, privately, to a personal cell number. Why? Why does a ransom demand for the family of a national television personality bypass that personality entirely and go directly to the phone of the man who dropped Nancy off at 9:50 on the night she disappeared? Hold that question, because there is a second one. On the morning of February 1st, 2025, Nancy Guthrie's heart medication was sitting on her kitchen counter. Her evening dose was due at 10. Tommaso dropped her off at 9:50. The sheriff said publicly, on camera, that Nancy could not survive 24 hours without that medication. Whoever took her left it on the counter. A kidnapper who wants $4 million does not leave the only thing keeping their hostage alive. That is not a theory. That is not speculation. That is the basic logic of any crime where the victim's survival is the source of your leverage. They left the medication. They left the phone. They left the purse. They left the cash inside the purse. They took nothing except Nancy. That tells you everything about what this was. And before we go into the evidence, there is one more question, one that has been sitting in the public record since Savannah Guthrie disclosed it in an interview, and nobody followed it where it leads. She said one of the ransom notes sounded like an apology, that the sender wrote they did not realize Nancy was so fragile, that they did not know her heart was that weak. In 60 years of documented kidnapping for ransom cases, no kidnapper has ever sent an apology to a victim's family explaining that her medical complications were unexpected. Not once. So who wrote that note, and what were they actually trying to accomplish? This is the Crime Files. No sensationalism, no exploitation, just evidence, just analysis, just the pursuit of truth. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in a house in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona. Wide desert lots, quiet streets. A neighborhood where the nights are still enough that a dog barking toward a neighbor's property in the early hours would wake people up. She was the mother of Savannah Guthrie, anchor of the NBC Today show. By every account, she was a woman of routine, a woman whose daily life had a rhythm that the people close to her knew well. She had a pacemaker. Now, she had heart medication she took on a schedule. She wore hearing aids during the day and removed them before she went to sleep at night. These details matter enormously. We will come back to every single one of them. Here is the timeline. And pay attention to the hours, because the hours are the case. 9:50 p.m., January 31st, 2025. Tommaso Cioni, Nancy's son-in-law, drops her off at her house. He says the garage door closed behind her. That is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie that does not come exclusively from his account. No neighbor reported seeing the drop-off. No external camera captured her walking inside. Everything after 9:50 p.m. comes from a single witness. Noon, February 1st, 2025. 14 hours later. The first phone call to check on Nancy. 14 hours. That is the gap. That is the window. Between 9:50 at night and noon the following day, nobody called. Nobody texted. Nobody drove the 4 miles from Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni's home to check on an 84-year-old woman with a pacemaker who had just gone home alone. 14 hours is enough time to drive to the house, carry out a crime, transport a body, return home, sleep, wake up, and have breakfast before anyone picks up a phone. The only thing required to guarantee that window is to not make a call. When Annie and Tommaso arrived at the house around noon, what they found was not what a violent stranger break-in looks like. There was no overturned furniture, no broken glass, no drawers pulled open, no objects displaced by someone who did not know where anything was kept. A law enforcement source confirmed to a national news outlet on March 31st, 2025, the word investigators used to describe the interior: immaculate. Every room untouched except for two details. The back doors were propped open using Nancy's own flower pots, taken from her own patio in the dark, and there was blood at the front entrance. Those two details do not belong in the same crime. The back doors tell you the original plan. The blood at the front entrance tells you the plan collapsed. Understanding what happened between those 2 points is understanding what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Now, let us go back further, Because the surveillance on this property did not start the night Nancy disappeared, January 11th, 2025. 3 weeks before the abduction, the man in the ski mask appears in the doorbell footage at Nancy's front porch. That same night, someone conducts a Google search of Nancy's specific street address from within Tucson. The search is not routed through a VPN. It is not originating from another state. It is local, and it is simultaneous with the physical presence on the porch. Police reports indicate the FBI reviewed this search as part of the investigation. That is not curiosity. That is reconnaissance. Digital and physical, running in parallel on the same night, from the same city, targeting the same address. Between January 11th and January 31st, the cameras on Nancy's property were neutralized. Not all at once, methodically, over multiple visits. The layout of the property, the position of the back doors, the location of the side gate near the garage, the weight and position of the flower pots on the back patio. All of this was assessed and memorized by someone who had time to do it carefully. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was a planned operation with a 3-week preparation period. And the person running that preparation knew the property the way you know something when you have been there before in the daylight. Now the ransom notes. Because what those notes contain is more important than anything that has been said about them publicly. February 2nd, 2025. One day after Nancy disappears, the first ransom communication arrives, then another on February 3rd. Together they demand $4 million in Bitcoin, payable to a verified cryptocurrency wallet address, by 5 in the afternoon on February 5th. If that deadline passed unpaid, the demand escalates to $6 million by 5 p.m. on February 9th. Harvey Levin of TMZ received one of the primary notes. He described it publicly as structured, well-spaced, written with sophisticated vocabulary, not a note scratched in panic, formatted, organized, the work of someone with composure and above-average literacy. Now here is what was inside those notes that should have been the lead story on every network covering this case. The sender included specific non-public details about the crime scene. They knew about damage to a floodlight at the property. They knew the exact location of Nancy's Apple Watch inside the house. Neither of those details had been released to the public. Neither of those details could be guessed. You cannot know which specific floodlight was damaged unless you were there when it was damaged. You cannot know where an Apple Watch is sitting inside a home you have never entered. The person who wrote those notes was inside Nancy Guthrie's house on the night she was taken, or they received a detailed account from someone who was. There is no third option. Now look at the man in the doorbell footage. Ski mask, Ozark Trail backpack, gun holster worn incorrectly, over the jacket instead of under it. He uses a potted plant to cover the camera lens. His movements are uncertain. His tactical posture is the posture of someone who has seen how this is done, not someone who has done it before. He is operationally clumsy. That person did not write those notes. The intelligence level is different. The skill set is different. The composure is different. The person who composed those communications and the person standing on the porch are not the same individual, which means one of two things. Either there are multiple people involved, someone who planned and someone who acted, or the notes were created after the crime by someone constructing a story around something that was never a kidnapping for ransom. February 5th, 2025. The first deadline passes. No payment is made. The price is supposed to escalate to $6 million. No follow-up communication arrives. February 9th, 2025. The second deadline passes. Still nothing. The family responds publicly. Savannah releases videos saying they received the message and will pay. The reward climbs to $1 million. The Bitcoin wallet sits open and functional, capable of receiving payment. Nobody sends anything. Nobody follows through. The deadlines evaporate. And here is the behavioral question that dissolves the ransom theory before we even get to the medication. If you have a living hostage, if your leverage is a breathing human being, you do not give the family 4 days before the first deadline. You establish proof of life within hours. You put the phone to her ear. You send a photograph with that day's newspaper visible. You create urgency, because urgency is leverage. And without it, the family works the investigation instead of cooperating with you. These notes created deadlines and produced nothing else. No proof of life, not once, not a photograph, not a recording, not a video, nothing demonstrating that Nancy Guthrie was alive when those demands were written. Now, February 11th, 2025. A different note arrives at TMZ. Different sender, different demand. Not $4 million, 1 Bitcoin, $66,000 to $77,000 at the time. And what was being offered in exchange was not Nancy. It was a name, the alleged kidnapper's name. A third party, someone separate from whoever took Nancy, claiming to have information about the crime and offering to sell it. And this third party claimed to have tried to contact family members before going to the media. Not Savannah Guthrie, Annie Guthrie and Cameron Guthrie, the siblings in Arizona, the ones geographically closest to the situation. Why Annie and Cameron? Why not Savannah, who has the resources, the platform, and whose celebrity was supposedly the entire motivation for this crime, unless whoever sent that note believed the relevant answers were not in New York. Unless they believed the people who mattered most to understanding this crime were in Tucson. February 18th, 2025. Another note. Different cryptocurrency address. More graphic language. More explicit threats. The FBI contacts Mexican authorities in connection with this communication. And then silence. No new public demands since mid-February. 7 weeks with no follow-through from whoever sent those notes. Savannah Guthrie disclosed in an interview something about one of those notes that has not received the analytical attention it deserves. She said one of them sounded like an apology. The sender expressed guilt. They wrote that they did not realize Nancy was so fragile, that they did not know her heart was that weak. Picture the person capable of entering an 84-year-old woman's home at 2 in the morning, removing her from her bed in her pajamas with no shoes, and transporting her somewhere in the dark. Now picture that same person sitting down and writing a note to her family, saying they feel sorry about how things turned out, because they did not know she was that fragile. Those two profiles do not belong to the same human being. The first ransom notes are cold and controlled. Deadlines, escalating demands, structured threats. The language of someone who believes they are running a transaction and intends to complete it. The apology note is soft, regretful, something closer to a sympathy card than a ransom demand. Reading both together is like reading a corporate contract, and then a handwritten note slipped under a neighbor's door. They are not written by the same person, or they are not written for the same purpose. The first notes were designed to look like a kidnapping was underway. The apology was designed to provide an ending, to give the family a narrative they could accept, to let them believe Nancy died accidentally during a botched operation by strangers who did not know how sick she was. Because an accidental death during a stranger kidnapping is a tragedy with no further investigation required. A deliberate act by someone Nancy trusted is something entirely different. The apology note is the only thing standing between those two conclusions. Now the medication, and this is where the ransom theory does not just weaken, it died. Nancy Guthrie's heart medication was on her kitchen counter on the morning of February 1st. Her 10 p.m. dose was due. Tommaso dropped her off at 9:50. The bottles were right there, visible, reachable, on the counter. The sheriff stated publicly and on camera that Nancy could not survive 24 hours without that medication. Medical experts who reviewed the case estimated she might last up to 72 hours, possibly slightly longer because of the pacemaker. But the underlying cardiac condition required consistent pharmaceutical management. Without those pills, she begins to deteriorate within a day. Apply that to the kidnapping for ransom theory. Your hostage is your entire reason for being in that house. She has $4 million of leverage. She is the asset around which every risk you are taking is justified. Without her alive, you have nothing. You have exposed yourself to a federal kidnapping investigation, you have left physical evidence at a crime scene, and you have collected $0. She has to stay alive. That medication is not an optional detail. It is the foundation of your plan. You take the pills. Every version of this crime where ransom is the motive ends with you taking the pills. You do not need a medical degree. You grab every bottle on that counter and you bring them because your hostage needs them, and you need your hostage alive. It takes 5 seconds. You are already in the house. You are already taking the person. The bottles are right there. They left them, and not just the medication. Nancy's phone was on the nightstand. In a kidnapping for ransom, the phone is your proof of life channel. You use it to put her voice on a call to her daughter, or you take it so the family cannot attempt to locate her. Either way, you take it. Standard logic, documented in every kidnapping for ransom case on record. They left the phone. They left the purse. They left the cash. They left the medication. They took nothing except Nancy. 3 possibilities exist. First, they did not know she needed medication, but that directly contradicts the level of preparation this crime required. 3 weeks of surveillance, multiple visits to neutralize cameras, the property layout memorized well enough to grab specific flower pots in darkness without hesitation. You do not achieve all of that level of preparation while somehow missing pill bottles sitting in open view on a kitchen counter. Second, they knew and did not care, which means keeping her alive was never the objective. The ransom demand was either a layer of misdirection built after the fact or a secondary consideration that was never central to the actual plan. Third, they knew. They intended to take the medication, but the plan collapsed inside the house before anyone reached the kitchen. Something went wrong in the bedroom, and that something changed everything. This is where the hearing aids become the most critical, overlooked detail in this entire investigation. Nancy removed her hearing aids before going to sleep. Without them, she was functionally deaf. She could not hear someone entering her room. She could not hear commands. She could not hear "get up," "come with me," "do not make a sound." Place the suspect in that bedroom. He enters in the dark. He approaches the bed. He gives verbal commands. And the 84-year-old woman lying there does not respond, does not move, does not comply because she cannot hear a single word. If you are standing over someone in the dark, under time pressure, with 3 doors propped open behind you and a route planned through a side gate to a waiting vehicle, and the person you came to take simply does not respond to anything you say, escalation happens fast. A hand on her shoulder, a sharper command, a pull, a push, a fall against the nightstand. And now there is blood that was not supposed to be there. That sequence explains everything that does not fit the ransom theory. The blood at the front entrance, the immaculate rooms everywhere else, the shift from the planned back exit to the improvised front exit, the medication left on the counter because the route to the kitchen was never reached. The plan did not survive the bedroom, and it explains the apology note precisely. We did not realize she was so fragile. We did not know her heart was that weak, because whoever wrote it is describing the exact moment the plan came apart, the moment Nancy did not respond to commands she could not hear, the moment a controlled operation became something else entirely. But here is the detail within that detail that should be troubling every investigator on this case. The suspect who spent 3 weeks surveilling this property knew the camera positions, knew the door layout, knew the flower pot locations on the back patio, knew which weekends Nancy would be home alone, but apparently did not know that she removed her hearing aids at night and could not hear without them. That gap in intelligence suggests one of two things. Either the person who gathered information about the property was not the same person who entered it. The architect knew the external details. The operative did not know the personal ones. Or the hearing aid detail was something even a close acquaintance might not have explicitly known, because Nancy removed them privately and did not discuss her level of hearing loss openly. Either path leads to the same conclusion. The plan was built on incomplete information, and that incomplete information is what turned a planned operation into a crime scene. Now the backpack. The Ozark Trail pack visible in the doorbell footage is full, packed out. But watch what happens when the suspect leans forward to position the flower pot over the camera lens. The bag does not shift laterally the way a heavy load shifts. It does not pull him off balance. The weight is even and light. The silhouette is consistent with something flat and folded inside. Not tools, not restraints. Not the standard inventory of a kidnapping operation designed to control a living person during transport. In documented kidnapping for ransom cases, perpetrators bring restraints, zip ties, rope, flex cuffs, something to prevent a living hostage from struggling or calling out during transport. The contents of a bag for holding someone alive look different from the contents of a bag for containing something that is not walking out on its own. A flat folded item consistent with the weight profile of that bag is consistent with a tarp, a sheet, a large covering material, the kind of thing you bring when you expect to wrap something rather than restrain someone. The shape of that backpack tells you what its carrier expected to carry out of that house. Now the flower pots. Because the mechanics of how they were used tell you exactly what kind of person used them. 3 access points were propped open: the back kitchen door, the back patio door, the side gate near the garage, all 3 using containers already sitting on Nancy's patio, not carried in, selected on site, in darkness, by someone who knew precisely where to reach. The back kitchen door has a security screen that pulls from one side. To prop it open, you pull the screen with one hand, locate a pot nearby, wedge it in position, then use a second pot to hold the interior door. 2 doors, 1 threshold, 2 pots, in the dark, under time pressure, without a single moment of searching or fumbling. That is not improvisation. That is someone who had already walked through this entry in their mind with enough specificity to know the pot locations, the door mechanics, and the sequence required to hold both open simultaneously. The side gate was also propped. That gate connects the street to the backyard and from there to the propped back doors. It sits beside the garage, the same garage where Tommaso says he watched Nancy enter at 9:50 on the night of January 31st. Whoever propped that gate open was creating a corridor, a planned route from the street through the property and into the house. A planned route is not what strangers build. Strangers figure out the route when they arrive. A planned route is what someone builds when they have spent time understanding a property they intend to enter. And if the plan was to exit through the back, through the yard, through the gate, to a vehicle on the street, then something disrupted it. A neighbor's dog, documented in statements gathered near the property. The dog woke up and began barking toward Nancy's house in the middle of the night, an hour it does not normally bark, directed toward the back of the property, where the doors were propped open, where the exit route was waiting. A barking dog in a quiet residential neighborhood at 2 in the morning is exactly the kind of noise that wakes people up. That triggers motion sensors. That makes neighbors look out windows. The back exit becomes a liability in seconds. Plan B is the front, which brings us to the security gate. And this is the detail that makes the insider theory not a theory. It makes it a structural requirement of the evidence. Nancy had a heavy metal security gate on her front door. A neighbor named Laura, who has the same model, told a reporter that when those gates are locked, you are not getting through. You cannot pick it. You cannot force it. It is a barrier that requires someone on the interior to disengage and open it. The man in the doorbell footage is standing outside that gate. He is not working on it. He is not forcing it. He is standing in position and waiting. And the gate opens from the inside. A stranger does not open a security gate from inside a house they have never been in. That gate requires interior access, interior knowledge, interior presence. Someone was inside that house who let the man on the porch in, or who passed Nancy out to him, or who was the primary actor while the man on the porch served as transport and lookout. You cannot construct any version of a stranger crime that accounts for that gate opening from the inside. It is not possible. Only someone with access could have done it. The medication on the counter kills the ransom theory. The security gate proves the insider theory. Now the geography, because when you map the physical locations in this case, the coordinates keep pointing to the same address. Annie Guthrie and Tommaso Cioni live 4 miles from Nancy's house. 10 minutes by car. They are the last people confirmed to have seen Nancy alive. Tommaso was the last person to see her. Their city is where the January 11th Google search originated. Their neighborhood is where the FBI visited a gas station with a Bitcoin ATM, the same cryptocurrency the ransom notes demanded. The ransom text from Derek Kayla went to Tommaso's personal cell number. Kayla is connected to the same Tucson music scene as Tommaso. Tommaso's bandmate of 19 years, Dominic Evans, carries felony convictions for burglary, robbery, theft, and embezzlement, fits the FBI's physical description of the suspect, and lives minutes from Nancy's home. Annie's car was held by investigators for over 40 days under what was described as an exhaustive search. 40 days is not a standard processing window. 40 days means investigators believed something specific was in or on that vehicle. 14 hours passed between the last confirmed sighting of Nancy and the first phone call to her home. The people who lived 4 miles away did not make that call. And now, photographs have surfaced showing vehicles at Nancy's property, with people carrying boxes out of the residence, before she has been legally declared dead, before the case has been officially closed. When you remove ransom from this case and ask what remains, you get a short list. Personal motive. Someone who needed Nancy gone for reasons connected to the people closest to her, not strangers motivated by celebrity proximity. Or a commissioned act. Someone inside the circle who wanted the outcome, and someone outside it who was sent to carry out the mechanics. The architect and the operative. The first ransom notes, written with interior knowledge of the house, were composed by the architect. The apology note was also composed by the architect, but not to collect money. To provide the family with an emotionally satisfying conclusion that pointed their grief away from the people who needed to be protected from scrutiny. The third-party note on February 11th was written by someone adjacent to the crime, trying to profit from proximity to knowledge they did not directly possess. 3 different communications, 3 different purposes, none of them designed to actually collect a ransom. Now the man who cleared the family, because his conduct in this investigation is itself a piece of evidence about the investigation. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos went on camera and stated definitively that the family had been cleared. At the time this video is produced, he is facing an oath hearing before the County Board of Supervisors on April 7, 2025. The board voted to require him to submit official reports under oath because they have lost confidence in his ability to report accurately without legal consequences attached to his statements. His own government no longer trusts him to tell the truth voluntarily. This is the man who denied the existence of a glove the FBI says was recovered from inside the house, a physical piece of evidence, described by federal investigators as part of their evidentiary collection, denied by the local sheriff. He contradicted 4 national news networks about what the doorbell photographs showed. He sent DNA samples to a private laboratory in Florida, rather than to the FBI laboratory at Quantico. He released the crime scene before federal processing was complete. He allowed a pool cleaner onto the active crime scene, a third party with no investigative role, and every opportunity to contaminate physical evidence that cannot be recovered once disrupted. He drew a search perimeter that excluded a neighboring property camera system that had captured relevant footage. He disclosed the pacemaker detection technology to local radio before the search using that technology had concluded, alerting anyone monitoring local media to what investigators were looking for and where. When asked if he had made mistakes and had any regrets, he said no to both. Former prosecutor Matt Murphy said publicly he would put his bottom dollar on the suspect being a known individual already somewhere in the Pima County system. He called the investigation a clown show. He said the Guthrie family deserves better than what this investigation has delivered. He is right on all 3 counts. The FBI's presence in this case is itself instructive. Federal agencies do not dedicate major case resources to kidnapping situations where the evidence clearly indicates outside perpetrators and the investigation is straightforward. They do sustain attention when the evidence is complex, when insider involvement is a genuine investigative question, and when local law enforcement capacity is insufficient or compromised. The FBI visited the gas station near Annie and Tommaso's house, not the stations near Nancy's house, the one blocks from the home of the last confirmed witnesses. Former FBI agent Jason Pace has been specific about the unmatched DNA. Genetic material found at the scene that does not belong to Nancy or anyone in her immediate circle is, in his professional assessment, the most important remaining thread in this case. Genetic genealogy, the methodology that identified the Golden State Killer from a crime scene sample collected more than 40 years earlier, is fully capable of resolving this. The science works on samples far smaller and more degraded than investigators prefer. If the DNA from Nancy's scene is intact, and if it is being processed through the full capability available to federal forensic analysis rather than a private laboratory in Florida, that sample points to a specific person. The question is whether the results arrive before time and political pressure erode the investigation further. Let me stack the complete evidence record one final time, because when you see it assembled rather than in pieces, the conclusion it points to is not a theory. It is the place every thread in this case leads when you follow it honestly. 9:50 p.m., January 31st, 2025. Nancy Guthrie enters her home. Her garage door closes, the last confirmed sighting, somewhere between 9:50 p.m. and the early hours of February 1st. Someone with interior access opens the front security gate from inside. The man in the ski mask enters. Something goes wrong in the bedroom. The plan shifts from back exit to front. Blood hits the concrete at the front entrance. Noon, February 2nd, 2025. 14 hours after the last sighting. The first phone call to Nancy's home. February 2nd and 3rd. Ransom notes arrive containing non-public interior details of the crime scene. No proof of life accompanies any demand. February 5th. The first payment deadline passes without contact. February 9th. The second deadline passes. Silence. February 11th. A third-party note to TMZ offers to sell a name. Claims to have tried to reach Annie and Cameron directly. February 18th, a final threatening note. The FBI contacts Mexican authorities. Mid-February onward, 7 weeks of complete silence. April 7th, 2025. The Pima County Sheriff faces an oath hearing before the County Board of Supervisors. April 6th, 2025. Savannah Guthrie returns to the Today Show. Somewhere in Tucson, boxes are leaving a house that belongs to a woman who has not been legally declared dead. The medication is still on the counter. The ransom theory was placed on this case before the first note arrived. Cameron Guthrie used the word kidnapping on the first phone call before any evidence was processed. Before any demand had been received, it became the frame. The family built their public response around it. The reward was structured around it. The press conferences assumed it. But the evidence has been pointing somewhere else since the morning of February 1st. The pill bottle tells you the motive was not ransom. The backpack tells you what the person expected to carry out. The flower pots tell you they knew this property from memory. The immaculate house tells you they moved through it with familiarity, not the confusion of a stranger in an unfamiliar space. The ransom notes tell you the author was inside the house. The apology tells you the purpose was misdirection, not collection. The security gate tells you someone was already inside when the man on the porch arrived. The Google search tells you the reconnaissance was local. The Bitcoin ATM tells you the FBI's attention went to a specific neighborhood. The ransom text tells you it went to a specific phone. The 40-day car hold tells you investigators were looking for something specific in a specific vehicle. The 14 hours of silence tell you the people who lived 4 miles away were not surprised. Someone in Tucson knows what happened to Nancy Guthrie. The evidence does not place them far away. The evidence does not describe strangers. The evidence places them 4 miles from her front door, on a route that passes a gas station with a Bitcoin ATM, in a house that is 10 minutes from where Nancy went to sleep on the night of January 31st. This is not just a story. It is a real life, a real family, and a case where the evidence has been assembling itself into a clear picture that nobody in an official position has been willing to describe out loud. The pill bottle is on the counter. Every piece of evidence in this case points to the same address. The distance is 4 miles. The silence has been 14 hours, then 7 weeks, then counting. The search for truth continues. When law enforcement analyzes a disappearance, one of the first questions they ask is not who did it. The first question is what category of crime this is. Is it a stranger abduction? Is it a family-related incident? Is it a financial crime dressed as something else? The category determines the investigative direction. Get the category wrong and you spend 60 days looking in the wrong place. This case was categorized as a stranger kidnapping for ransom from the very first phone call. Cameron Guthrie used that word, kidnapping, before any note arrived, before any demand was received, before any evidence had been processed, and once that word was spoken publicly, it became the frame. The family, the investigators, the media, the national audience, everyone organized their understanding of what happened around that frame. But a frame is only useful if it fits the picture. and the picture in this case does not fit the stranger kidnapping frame at any point. Stranger kidnapping for ransom is a documented and studied category of crime. It has established behavioral patterns. The perpetrator makes contact quickly because time works against them. They provide proof of life because proof of life is leverage. They follow through on deadlines because credibility is the only tool they have. They take the items that extend the hostage's survival because the hostage is the product. They take the communication device because it controls the flow of information. They use the ransom demand as an opening position in a negotiation that they fully intend to complete. None of those patterns are present here. Not one. Contact was not made immediately. Proof of life was never provided despite multiple opportunities to do so. Deadlines were allowed to pass without follow-through. The medication was left behind. The phone was left behind. The demand was not a negotiation opener because there was no negotiation. The family agreed to pay, and the other side went silent. When a documented behavioral pattern produces none of its expected outputs, investigators have two choices. They can conclude that the perpetrators were unusually incompetent across every dimension simultaneously, or they can conclude that the behavior does not match the pattern because the crime is not what it was labeled. Retired FBI agent Steve Moore addressed this directly when he said the reward remains unclaimed, because the only people with knowledge of what happened are the same people responsible for it. That statement is not rhetorical. It reflects a specific investigative conclusion. In genuine stranger kidnappings, a reward at the level offered in this case almost always produces a witness. The money creates pressure. A partner gets nervous. Someone hears too much at the wrong time and decides the reward is worth more than loyalty to a person they were never really loyal to in the first place. The reward cracks the case because the information exists outside the immediate circle, and money motivates disclosure. When the reward produces nothing, it is because the people who know are the people who did it. And those people do not need money. They need silence. 7 weeks of silence from whoever sent those ransom notes. The deadline passed. The price was supposed to double. Nothing happened. The family said they would pay. Nothing happened. $1 million reward was announced. Nothing happened. That is not incompetence. That is the behavior of people for whom the ransom collection was never the actual goal. Now, let us talk about what the investigation into this case tells us about the investigation itself. When the FBI visits a gas station, they do not do so casually. Field agents operating in a major missing persons and suspected abduction case do not follow leads that have not been vetted and assessed as significant. The gas station near Annie and Tommaso's home was visited because something connected it to this case. Whether that connection was the Bitcoin ATM and its transaction records, the security camera footage of who visited and when, the staff who might have recognized relevant individuals, or all of the above, the FBI was there because the evidence directed them there. That gas station is not near Nancy's house. It is near the home of the last people confirmed to have seen her alive. Think about what it means for federal investigators to physically travel to a location 4 miles from the victim's house and a few blocks from the son-in-law's home, rather than to any of the numerous businesses in the immediate vicinity of the crime scene. That is a geographic choice that reflects an investigative conclusion. The investigation is not centered on Nancy's neighborhood. It is centered on a different neighborhood. Court documents from the Derek Kayla arrest and charging provide another geographic anchor. Kayla sent a ransom text demanding Bitcoin. He sent it to Tommaso Cioni's personal cell number, not to a tip line, not to law enforcement, not to Savannah Guthrie, who is the public figure whose celebrity was supposedly the motivating factor for this entire crime. To Tommaso, personally, by name, to a number that is not publicly listed. To know Tommaso Cioni's personal cell number, you either know him or you have obtained that number through a relationship with someone who does. A stranger who read about the Savannah Guthrie kidnapping in the news does not have the private cell number of her brother-in-law in Tucson. Kayla's connection to the Tucson music scene and Tommaso's involvement in that same scene is not a coincidence that can be reasoned away. These are not two people who happen to live in the same large city without any connection. They move in overlapping circles. And someone in one of those overlapping circles had Tommaso's phone number in a contact list that Kayla could access. Dominic Evans, Tommaso's bandmate of 19 years. Felony convictions for burglary, robbery, theft, and embezzlement. The FBI released a physical description of the suspect seen at the scene. Evans fits that description. He lives minutes from Nancy's home. A man with documented experience in illegal entry and theft who has a 19-year personal and professional relationship with the son-in-law of the victim and who fits the physical description of the suspect is a thread the FBI would be derelict to ignore. And they have not ignored it. What the outcome of that investigative thread is, as of the production of this video, has not been publicly disclosed. Annie Guthrie's car, blue Honda CR-V, held by investigators for 43 days. The description used by sources close to the investigation was exhaustive search. Not a cursory examination, not a standard evidence processing procedure, an exhaustive search over 43 days. Investigators hold a vehicle for that length of time for one of two reasons. Either they found something and needed to conduct extensive additional analysis, or they were looking for something specific and needed the time to either find it or definitively rule out its presence. In either case, the vehicle was considered significant enough to retain for a period more than 6 times longer than standard processing. Annie Guthrie is Nancy's daughter. She lives 4 miles from her mother's house. Her car was treated as a significant piece of evidence in a federal investigation into that mother's disappearance. Those 3 facts exist together in the public record. Now consider the photographs that have emerged showing activity at Nancy's property: vehicles parked outside, people carrying boxes from the residence. This while Nancy has not been legally declared dead, while the case remains officially open, while the family has not received an official determination about what happened to the woman whose belongings are being removed from her home. In an active federal investigation, the scene of the crime is not a personal estate to be managed at the convenience of the people who have access to it. The timing of that activity and the nature of what appears to be happening in those photographs is something that would interest any competent investigator reviewing this case. What was in those boxes? Who authorized access to the property? When did that access begin? And who, in a federal investigation into the suspected abduction and possible death of the home's owner, gave permission for the contents of that home to be removed before any official determination has been made? Those questions are not asked rhetorically. They are the specific investigative questions that the public record demands someone answer. Let us now address the timeline one more time, because the hours of this case are its most important evidence, and they have not been presented in their full context anywhere in the public coverage. 9:50 p.m., January 31st, 2025. Nancy Guthrie arrives home. The garage door closes behind her. This is the last moment of her life where her location and status are established by anything other than a single witness's account. From this moment forward, what we know about Nancy comes entirely from inference, physical evidence at the crime scene, and the statements of people who are themselves subjects of investigation. Sometime between 9:50 p.m. and the early hours of February 1st, the crime occurs. The exact hour is not publicly established, but the physical evidence at the scene, the blood at the front entrance, the propped back doors, the positioning of the flower pots, is consistent with a crime that occurred in the late night hours, when the neighborhood was quiet and the risk of witness observation was lowest. The neighbor's dog barked. The back exit route was compromised. The exit shifted to the front. The security gate opened from inside, blood on the porch concrete. Sometime in the early morning hours of February 1st, the scene is left as found: immaculate interior, propped back doors, blood at the front, medication on the counter, phone on the nightstand, purse with cash on a table. The house looks like someone left unexpectedly, rather than like a location where violence occurred. Noon, February 1st, 2025. 14 hours after drop-off, the first contact attempt. Annie and Tommaso discover Nancy is missing. They arrive at the house. They are, by Brian and Ann's reporting of their own account, not initially certain what has happened. They thought it might have been a medical event, because the back doors were open and it did not make sense. Those are not the words of people who arrived expecting to find the aftermath of a planned crime, or they are the words of people who needed to describe their reaction in a way that was consistent with genuine surprise. The distinction between those two interpretations is one of the most important questions in this case. February 1st through February 2nd, law enforcement arrives. The crime scene is established. The sheriff's department begins its investigation. The FBI is notified. And in this period, Cameron Guthrie uses the word kidnapping on a phone call before any ransom demand has arrived. That word, spoken before the evidence that would justify it existed, became the frame that shaped everything that followed. If you tell investigators on day one that this is a kidnapping for ransom, before any note has arrived, before any demand has been received, before any evidence of a ransom motive has been established, you have pointed them in a direction. And investigators, who are humans subject to confirmation bias like all humans, begin to find things that support the direction they were pointed toward, rather than things that challenge it. The flower pots support kidnapping. So does the ski mask and the man on the porch. So does the Bitcoin address in the ransom notes. The medication on the counter does not support kidnapping. The immaculate house does not support kidnapping by strangers. The security gate opening from inside does not support kidnapping by strangers. The absence of proof of life does not support a kidnapping where the hostage's survival is the leverage. When you have evidence that points in multiple directions, the frame you choose determines which evidence you weight and which you minimize. The ransom frame minimized the medication. It minimized the gate. It minimized the 14 hours of silence. It minimized the fact that the ransom text went to Tommaso's personal number. It minimized the Google search from Tucson on January 11th. None of those details have been adequately explained by the ransom theory. And a theory that cannot explain the central evidence of the case is not a theory that should be driving a federal investigation. Here's where the case stands today. The FBI has reduced its public personnel presence in Tucson while continuing the investigation through other means. Former FBI agent Jason Pace confirms the genetic genealogy analysis of the unmatched DNA is the most significant active thread. The technology is capable. The question is authorization, funding, and time. Sheriff Chris Nanos faces an oath hearing on April 7, 2025. The county government above him has formally determined that his voluntary reporting cannot be trusted. The investigation he has been conducting with compromised credibility, a released crime scene, a pool cleaner on the property, DNA sent to a private lab, and a denied glove is the official investigation into what happened to Nancy Guthrie. Savannah Guthrie returns to the Today Show on April 6th. Life continues the way life must, but continuing forward is not the same as accepting an ending that the evidence does not support. $1 million reward sits uncollected. The Bitcoin wallet address from the ransom notes has never received a transaction. The deadlines in the notes have all passed. The notes have stopped arriving. 7 weeks of silence from whoever sent them. And somewhere in Tucson, someone knows the answer to every question that has been asked in this case. The evidence does not suggest they are far away. The evidence does not suggest they are strangers. The evidence places them in a specific neighborhood, connected to specific people, 4 miles from Nancy's front door, 10 minutes by car, on a route that passes a gas station with a Bitcoin ATM that the FBI drove to and examined. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She wore hearing aids during the day and removed them at night. She had heart medication she took on a schedule. She had a pacemaker and a routine and flower pots on her patio that someone who knew where they were grabbed in the dark to hold open the doors of her home. She was not a symbol. She was not a celebrity connection. She was a real person who went to sleep on a winter night in Tucson and did not wake up in her own house. The pill bottle is still on the counter. The security gate opened from the inside. The ransom text went to a personal number. The FBI drove to a gas station 4 miles from the crime. The car was held for 43 days. 14 hours passed without a phone call. Every piece of this evidence points in the same direction. The distance is 4 miles. The silence has been 14 hours, stretching into months. This is not just a story. This is a real life, a real family, and a case where the answers are closer than anyone in an official position has been willing to say out loud. The search for truth continues. $1 million, publicly announced, sitting uncollected for months. In every documented stranger kidnapping case where a reward at this level has been offered, the money eventually produces a witness. Someone talks. A partner loses their nerve. A drinking buddy heard something they should not have. The financial pressure of $1 million is enormous. Most people cannot resist it indefinitely. The reward has produced nothing. Steve Moore was not making an abstract observation when he said the only people who know are the people responsible. He was making a prediction rooted in investigative experience. And that prediction has now been confirmed by 7 weeks of silence and $1 million sitting uncollected. The answers are 4 miles away. The evidence says so.